Welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we are talking about Civil War, the new movie from Alex Garland. We started this podcast 7 years ago. Well, this is year 7. We started it 6 years ago, talking about Alex Garland with his film Annihilation. And it's always fun to get into whatever kind of messed up science fiction that he is getting into. And this is no different. Joining me to talk about this one, we've got Bradley Andrew joining me, returning to the podcast. We have a great conversation, lots of great puzzle pieces to get into. Before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. We got a lot of episodes on the way, so make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button. And also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, all the usual places. You could also join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. And with that said, let's get to this conversation about Civil War. All right, Bradley Andrew is back with us to talk about Civil War for some more Alex Garland time. He was here on our Men episode a couple of years ago. Bradley, how you doing?
Good, David. How's it going?
I am great, and like I said to you before, what better way is there to start a day than talking about our impending doom as a country?
Perfect way to start the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know, we talked about this last time when you were on for Men, but we're both pretty big Alex Garland fans.
Right. Yeah, I'm a huge Alex Garland fan. I've been a fan of his. I know I said it on the last episode for Men, but I've been a big fan of his ever since he was a writer, like a screenwriter solely. I've followed his career. So when he announced that he was going to start directing, I was just completely, blown away by that news, because I was like, oh my God, I love this guy as a writer. I've always loved the collaborations he's had with Danny Boyle.
Sure.
So, when Ex Machina got announced, I was beyond the moon. And ever since then, I've been anticipating all of his films. And, he's never missed for me as a writer or a filmmaker. So for me, I've never been soured on him. Like, I know here recently, a lot of people have kind of soured on him. I feel like Men post that,
Yeah.
But yeah, I've followed him since the beginning, and it's been quite the ride, I can say that.
He's got that perfect personality within his work that is something that people turn against. Like, it's inevitable. There's just no way to get around it. And I don't know if it's the big ideas, because I think that's one thing about Civil War is this is more than anything, I think it's an idea movie.
Absolutely.
It's like, what if we show this big, huge, worst case scenario of where America could be headed, and then focus in on some character stuff, which we'll talk about as we're getting into puzzle pieces, I'm sure. But yeah, he is a big ideas guy, and people like to kind of rail against ideas guys, I feel like.
That, and he also, from interviews I've listened to him, with him, and he also has a very scientific mind. He has a very scientific oriented mind, and I think a lot of people think that's something they like, but then when they hear someone with that type of a mind speak on issues, and maybe with a little bit more neutrality than they would like sometimes, because they're coming at it from many different aspects. They're coming from a situation or problem or any type of thing. They're coming at it with that scientific mind, and to have a scientific mind, in my opinion, you kind of have to think at things from different perspectives, and I think he exercises that a lot with his films, and I think sometimes that might miss for some, sometimes it might hit. I always like it because I like the way he states it. For him, making a film is like having a conversation with the public. It's not, he's not just putting a piece of content or just a film out there just to put it out there. He's having an open dialogue with his audience, which I find fascinating. It could be, and all the subjects he always is kind of having a conversation about. The things he chooses to have conversations about might not be easy topics, but I think they're necessary to have conversations about.
Yeah, absolutely. And they aren't usually easy topics, that is for sure, but including this one. But let's start getting into some puzzle pieces, and we will, see what works and doesn't along the way. But what do you have for your first piece?
So for my first piece, I'm gonna start off with something a little heavy, which
Mm.
to be expected.
Most of them
It's
will
a
be.
filmmaker who kind of ties into my last episode with Dune Part 2, but Unsandies by Denis Villeneuve will be my first piece. And the reason I chose it, of course, it actually is set during a fictionalized civil war in the Middle East. That's what the bulk of the film is set against that backdrop. It is a piece where it kind of jumps between time, jumps back and forth between the past and the present within the film, which is
Mm.
something this film doesn't do, but it's kind of set against that backdrop of a civil war and just those heavy themes of war and the effects it has on um, the psychology of the region that's happening in. And, you know, a civil war, we think of it as, it's a war amongst a country is having a war amongst itself, but that really does ripple out into the world and affect the rest of the world as well. And I think something like Unsandies kind of shows that, and also kind of shows the generational trauma that war can cause. It kind of ripples
Sure.
through generations, and I think in this country we don't. I'm not sure if we think about that a lot because of with this civil war we've already had in this country and all the world wars we've had and everything, I think we need to think a little bit more about the repercussions of war, about the trauma that can be passed down through generations. And if we were to go into another civil war in this country, what that would psychologically do to,
Right.
its citizens and the generations down the line. We really have to think about, the future just as much as the present. I think a film like
Sure.
Unsandies really does that in a really raw way, and I feel like this film does that as well. I do
Mm.
feel this film does have a little bit of it feels a little bit more surreal, and maybe that's because I am an American. I am living in this time presently in
Sure.
these divided times, and it does have that surreal quality to it because it is the country that I live in. So it has that feeling. It has that. It doesn't have that separated quality that Ensembles has because it's set in the Middle East in this fictionalized
Mm.
civil war, and also just because I would love for Alex Garland and Denis to have a collaboration. I think they're
Oh,
two
yeah.
of the. I think we've actually talked about that before, but I think they're just two very important voices right now in kind of the big budget realm of filmmaking. And I would
Sure.
love to see that collaboration happen. I think they're kind of on a level together for me personally. They kind of
Mhm.
exist on a plane together, especially right now. And I just love that they both have films that are out right now, and they just like you were mentioning, they're both big ideas guys,
Yeah.
filmmakers.
Yeah.
So I'm attracted to filmmakers like that, and with those two, it's this endless attraction to the material that they pick. I just keep finding myself being more and more fascinated about the more the projects go along. It's just like more and more fascinating for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a hell of a collaboration. And I have to say, Incendies is the one Villeneuve film I have not seen yet. I
Really,
really want to watch it. And yeah, I'm going to have to check it out now. But to your points, though, in bringing that up as a puzzle piece, I mean, I do feel like most people who are not liking this movie, Civil War, are too focused on the war itself.
absolutely
Whereas the damn point of the movie is the effects of the war on these particular people, and
right.
we don't see movies like that about these people, the journalists and photojournalists specifically, and the effects of something like this on somebody like that. And I think that's what makes this movie interesting. I think that's obviously where Alex Garland's head was at in making something like this. It was not on just the war itself. The war is the backdrop for these characters, and but yeah, I definitely need to see Incendies and see how that comparison is. But speaking of those effects, I will go to the first thing that I thought of. I hadn't thought of this before seeing the movie, like from the trailer or anything, but after I was sitting there in the theater watching it, I kept thinking of No Country for Old Men.
Oh wow.
And I was I leaned over to my wife Gina and I kind of joked like, "This is No Country for 40-year-old women." It's like this war photographer who has just absolutely seen it all, and she is past the breaking point at this point in her life. And I couldn't stop thinking of Tommy Lee Jones in the end
Mm,
of No Country for Old Men, and
absolutely.
just how this is just one more in a long line of just atrocities that he has witnessed, just terrible, terrible things that happen in this country. And that is exactly where Kirsten Dunst's character is in this movie. It just had enough. It's really all she has, though. It is what life is for her. So there's kind of no getting out, but at the same time, she's done. And I really appreciate the looking at a character like this and the effects that all of this has had on her over time.
Yeah, she's absolutely fantastic in the film. Like her performance, I've seen it twice, and her performance both times really stood out to me. And to your point with Tommy Lee Jones in No Country for Old Men, it's almost like this. His character, there's this. It's like the death of the American dream personified. This.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I felt with Kirsten Dunst's character in this as well. It's just kind of like that death of this American dream that, especially with her character, I just saw it so much where she was disassociating and all of this. There's all this combat and violence going around her, and she's just disassociating so much throughout it, and it's almost she's just numb to it at this point. And I do really feel that in Tommy Lee Jones's character at the end of that film as well. So that is a great comparison that I would have never thought of, but I can totally see your point to it.
Right on, right on. Well, let's go on to another piece. What do you got next?
So my next piece, it's a little lighter than On Sunday. And I really like this comparison though, and it's Escape from New York by John Carpenter.
Nice.
Of course, the reason I picked this one is kind of obvious as well. It has the whole plot of saving the president as opposed to this film. It's a little different in this, but it's, there's that dystopian feel that John Carpenter kind of portrays a lot in his work. And honestly, just John Carpenter in general. I've never really heard Alex Garland talk about John Carpenter, but I do think he occupies a kind of similar space that John Carpenter did in his prime, where, progressively, like we were talking about, it seems like the audience has turned a little on Alex Garland's film. Not everyone, but just you can feel it a little more in the air than you could have back in 2014, 2015 when Ex Machina was coming out. So, and, John Carpenter kind of existed in that same kind of realm in his day, where he would come out with these very profound, kind of provocative genre movies. He would try to transcend genre, and he was hated for it back then. And I know a lot of people talk about that now with The Thing and They Live, films like that, where they were hated on release and kind of became cult films over time, and now they're kind of reevaluated to the point where they're not only cult films, they've transcended that. They've became important films, just within cinema in general. And I think Alex Garland kind of occupies that same space. A lot of differences between the men as well, but they both love video games, that's for sure. But yeah, I think he just kind of occupies a similar space where he's taking these genres and he's trying to embrace them to the fullest extent, but he's also trying to transcend them. And I think John Carpenter did that in his prime. And I think Escape from New York in particular would be a good puzzle piece. You could kind of do something with They Live as well, just with that would be a perfect piece as well. But Escape from New York, I was thinking, because it kind of is taking that action film aesthetic and just pushing it to the furthest ends of it in that dystopian world. It just made me think a lot of John Carpenter and especially Escape from New York.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I hadn't thought about that, but also another connection with like John Carpenter and his kind of filmography. Great scores. I always love the work that Ben Salisbury and Geoff Barrow do with the work of Alex Garland.
I was absolutely going to bring them up. They're two of my favorite composers, and it's pretty much their work with Alex Garland is, of course, what really stands out to me. They're great artists, in general, but their work with Alex Garland is it's really special. It's really special.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, since you brought up a slightly lighter one, I'll jump ahead to my lightest puzzle piece on my list here, and then we'll get back into some more dark stuff. But I was thinking of the Carl Denham character in King Kong, who, in the midst of all this chaos and destruction, keep rolling no matter what. No matter if your comrades are dying, no matter if people are getting shot and killed or eaten by monsters in that case, just keep on rolling. You've got to get the story. The story is what matters. In that case, it's greed more
Yeah.
so than telling the story, but still, it's, getting it on film for the world to see. And so, yeah, just kind of maybe a sillier one, but
Yeah.
I think definitely
I
fits
like
in with that kind of character.
It very much does fit in with that character, and that you were talking about it earlier, but that is such. When I went into this film, I knew he was gonna subvert my expectations. I expect that from Alex Garland. Um, but just the way he approached the material, like you were talking about through like the photojournalist and everything, I really liked that. I really thought that was refreshing. And to King Kong, that also is. That character has always been really interesting to me. This guy's just putting his life on the line for this, which you could see why within the film, but like you said, driven by greed. And I thought that was just a really interesting aspect of Civil War. Like you said, they're documenting this to send it back home. And like she says in the film, she thought she was sending a warning, but clearly something got lost in translation there. And it's really interesting, that perspective of these are the people that are documenting history. We rely so much on these people, but there is this mistrust of journalists, photojournalists, just the media in general right now. And it's very interesting because of that line, and just because I've heard Alex Garland talk about it just from that perspective of these are the people we look to document our history, yet we can't trust them. What kind of paradox is that,
Sure, absolutely. If you can't trust the news, which we can't at this point, what can you trust?
Right.
But yeah. Well, what do you got for your next puzzle piece?
So the next puzzle piece is one I've been seeing a lot. It's kind of an obvious one. I've been seeing it talked about a lot. It's Apocalypse Now, of course. Actually, when I first saw the trailer, that was the first thing I thought of. Just the shots, the aerial shots and everything, and just and of course, I've seen people talking about just the anti-war message, which I do really feel like Civil War is truly about, and I do feel like that's where some of the controversy comes from. I'm really fascinated by how the film was marketed, how it's how that's being pushed now since it's out in theaters. They're continually pushing different things, which I want to talk to you about, and just kind of like how it is approaching the material from that stance where it's not taking a side and it's just trying to show you from a truly objective point of view. It's just these are the characters and this is what they're experiencing. We're not pushing any type of an agenda or bias. We're just presenting it how it is. But Alex Garland is an artist, and of course things are going to slip through, just like with Coppola, things are going to slip through. And I just think it's interesting just coming at it from that perspective where a lot of people were perceiving it as this big action movie. They're wanting all of this violence and just mayhem, and it's going underneath that. And I think Coppola achieved that with Apocalypse Now, especially with the Marlon Brando character. I think what he represents in Apocalypse Now, I think, is pretty much what the film is about. That character is what the film is about, and I really do think Alex Garland subverted expectations majorly. I don't know if you've seen, but A24 has gotten a little bit of controversy pretty much within the past day because they're marketing the film with supposed AI images. And I think that's really interesting. And the reason why I find it really interesting is we're going through all of this with AI, specifically within the art world right now, and film, how it's going to be applied to film. And I'm just wondering if that's part of their marketing strategy as well, is to spread misinformation about a film that is about misinformation. What better way? It's meta marketing. And A24, I hope they're smarter than that. I truly think they are. I love A24. What they've done is just incredible with the artists, the stable of artists they've built over time, And so I really respect them. So I really hope that's what I think they're doing with that. That's my read on it, is they're kind of spreading misinformation about the film as kind of like a meta way of marketing it. And I think, like, to that point with Apocalypse Now, I think it's kind of in that same vein for that, where people see it as this big epic war film, but it's truly not.
Right, absolutely.
I know within the film community, everyone knows it's it's widely known as an anti-war film, but it's kind of funny how things get reclaimed throughout history as well
Sure.
against what their original intention was, and I think Apocalypse Now and a lot of other films kind of fall within that, where it's like this hoorah war thing where it's actually the complete opposite. I think
Yeah,
Civil War is kind
absolutely.
of being perceived as that as well. It's
Well,
fascinating.
actually, my next one was going to be Platoon.
Oh.
So, just right along in there with that same
Mhm.
kind of thing of movies that could be misconstrued for what the purpose is. But like, if you're missing the dehumanizing,
Right.
nature of what war has done to
Yeah.
these people and just absolutely losing their souls, I guess that's on you if you're missing that. But, I wanted to bring up Platoon, but along with Platoon, a movie I used Platoon as a puzzle piece for last year, The Creator,
Yeah.
which, speaking of this being an A24 production, it
Mhm.
is, I think, their biggest budget that they've ever had. But at
Yes.
the same time, it's still relatively small for a movie that is set against this giant war backdrop. So the way The Creator was able to, pull off all of these crazy effects with such a small budget, and then
Mhm.
this as well, I think it kind of fits right in there with like kind of this new era of, big, kind of sort of indie blockbusters, not really indie, but
Mhm.
kind of using that aesthetic while meshing it really well with what a blockbuster is, and the style of all of the big effects and all that for relatively cheap and being economical about it. So Platoon was a perfect puzzle piece for The Creator with the
Yeah,
way that people
absolutely.
start treating robots and everything. So
Mhm.
just that kind of circle of all of that I wanted to bring up here. Back to your AI point, it's so difficult. I mean, we could do
It
like a
is.
whole episode on
It's
that.
another very nuanced conversation, to have, and
Yeah, absolutely.
ties
So,
back to Ex Machina as well, Alex Garland's first directed feature. I mean, this man is just, he's tackling everything that no one wants to see portrayed on the screen, apparently.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think we're going to keep seeing that conversation come
Yeah,
up and come up
absolutely. I've
again.
been seeing it all over the place with Late Night with the Devil, and I think it had just a
Yeah,
small, maybe 1 second bit of AI used in it.
right,
And,
right.
it's like part of me thinks if they are using it in that strategy, which I think they are, that would be kind of a genius thing to do a little bit, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah, yeah. It's so hard to tell, but yeah, I don't know. I'm sure we'll be having this conversation on many, many episodes. So
Absolutely.
plus when my AI music video comes out. But let's I don't want to get canceled here. But what do you got for your next puzzle piece?
Well, I'm gonna jump off of Platoon and say Full Metal Jacket. I've heard
Sure.
that one brought up, not as much as Apocalypse Now. And mainly too with Full Metal Jacket, why I really thought of Full Metal Jacket was the soundtrack.
Mm,
I've seen people criticizing the soundtrack, which I could
hmm.
get in certain instances, but I really enjoyed the soundtrack as well as the score to the film. But yeah, that soundtrack, just of kind of how that soundtrack hits and the songs that Kubrick chose in certain moments of the
Hmm.
film. I mean, clearly he's trying to get multiple emotions out of you. He's
Yeah.
showing you these graphic scenes juxtaposed with these pop songs, and I wouldn't really call the soundtrack to Civil War pop, but it's the same effect, and I feel like
Sure.
Alex Garland is really trying to give that same effect that you feel in Full Metal Jacket. And I've seen like a lot of people. It's really interesting with Apocalypse Now as well that so many Vietnam War films have been kind of compared to this, and I think it's just because that was one of the first documented wars we were really seeing. It was really documented widespread, unlike the world wars where not as many people are seeing that, and that's really interesting as well. And I think Alex Garland does think about that specifically with this film, how history is documented, and back then it was getting broadcast into people's houses, and now it's like everyone's pockets. We have what's going on in the world 24/7, all over the
Sure.
world, constantly inundated with information, and it's like is our brains can we process all this information? Is it too much information at a point for us to process? So just in that perspective of thinking about the Vietnam War versus now, how we received news of the war back then versus how we receive it now, which is constant, and just the effects that has on it, and just what people like to call doom scrolling, or people who like to
Sure.
just kind of like do, it's this constant doom machine. I feel like is kind of invaded just the internet, social media, and it just of this impending doom, and I just feel like it's a neutral technology is a neutral force, and it's how we use it. It's, and I'm interested in that push and pull of where we blame technology or where we take the blame ourselves, and I feel like Alex
Mm.
Garland that's a prevalent theme in his work as well as Kubrick, and even in something like Full Metal Jacket, it's there because it's how that war was documented versus how it's documented now. It's just an interesting
Sure.
correlation about like that time period versus now, which is not a very long time period in the context of time,
Sure. Sure.
but when you think about it, how different we receive information now, it's really interesting to think about it in the context of maybe films about Vietnam.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That talking about the doom scrolling like that kind of does like bring to mind something that I was thinking during the movie that I was a little confused about because this is in the near future,
Hmm.
and speaking of doom scrolling, we're all on our phones constantly. It seemed like all the cell phone towers were down. Nobody
Yeah.
had cell phones, and like yeah, the hotel had Wi-Fi where they
Hmm.
could get on. So like who exactly is consuming this news? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's obviously we don't want a 3 hour movie of this. It's
Hmm.
already fairly depressing to begin with. But how exactly are people actually getting this news, this footage, this
Hmm.
coverage of what's going on? Was a question in my mind, and not really part of the point of the movie, but just
Right.
something that I was thinking about during it. And I don't know, the future when our cell phones don't work.
But I think it is a subconscious part of the movie because, we can't go anywhere without our phones. It's a part of us at this point, and
Yeah.
I think it is subconsciously a part of it because how we're consuming our information, what type of information we're consuming, how we're deciphering what's real, what isn't real. I think that is important, and I think it's an embedded part of our culture at this point.
Yeah.
And I think it's embedded within everything. And I think filmmakers are thinking about it, and all artists are thinking about it. And I think it is subconsciously there. So it does make sense to me why you were thinking about that.
Yeah,
So because I
sure.
think it is embedded in there, just because that's the way we watch films. That's the way we engage with art now. Is we
Yeah.
engage with it. We think about it in relation to our other technology, whether it's how we consume it, how we share something, how we put our own art out there. It is a part of it, and I think that's a really interesting part about of it. That
Yeah, no,
aspect of it's really
absolutely.
interesting to me.
Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna go with. So I feel like you could go with a bunch of Catherine Bigelow
Mm,
here. You could go to the war stuff, of course, Zero Dark 30, The Hurt Locker. But I'm gonna go with Detroit
okay.
for a puzzle piece. As far as an American city just on the brink of collapse
Hmm.
because of the weight of all this civil tension and upheaval. Here it is broken. It's
Yeah.
done. We're there. We're at the worst possible outcome of all of that. And the idea of just Americans turning on each other, everything that, all of the problems that we have kind of coming to a head. Of course, this is kind of a place to kind of go on a tangent about how amazing Jesse Plemons is in this
Oh
movie.
God. Yes.
Yeah, because I don't know if that comes up in any of your other puzzle pieces, but it doesn't really for me
No, it
necessarily. And
doesn't.
so,
But yes,
yeah,
I'm perfectly okay with giving him a shout out because wow, and I
yeah.
love the story behind that. He was basically just doing it as a favor. It's like wow,
Hmm.
that really just paid off, or that favor really paid off. It's
Yeah,
just incredible.
absolutely. That whole sequence is so perfectly calibrated. Like every
Yes.
bit of it is so creepy. But yeah, like in any of the war zone situations within the Civil War, like I was thinking about Detroit, especially once they get to Washington D.C.,
Mm-hmm.
a different American city, of course, the capital and all. But I mean, still seeing it all go down and
Yeah.
seeing it all just fall apart.
Yeah. It's just seeing it, like as I was saying earlier, I think films like that really highlight that. Like this is what you're looking at, this is what you're looking towards, like if you keep up this type of behavior. And I think seeing it portrayed in American cities by Americans is an important thing to see too. That is a reality that could happen, quite possibly. Who knows? It's happened before in the past, so why couldn't it happen again in the future? And I think that is an important, and it also brings something to mind to me that I think is a really important aspect of the film is how loud the gunshots are in this film.
I saw it in Dolby Cinema,
yeah,
and oh
I
man,
think that's a really important aspect of the film. I've seen a lot of people praise that, and I'm really glad because it's quite uncomfortable.
yeah,
It does feel really loud, and I'm really happy about that. I'm really glad I've seen people kind of squirm with the gunshots because that's a good thing. That
yeah,
people are
that's what we
uncomfortable,
want.
and that kind of brought that to mind when you were talking about Detroit, just because it made me very uncomfortable and just how loud the film is and just how just in your face that it is when it gets to those scenes. I just thought just seeing it presented, like I said, by Americans in an American city, as haunting
Yeah,
as that is, that's a very necessary thing for people to see. So
yeah,
yeah, that's absolutely right on with that puzzle piece, and it kind of ties into mine in a sort of a way.
hmm
My next two, I kind of have a companion piece to next,
let's
and
go for it.
I was gonna say The Hateful Eight and Inglourious Bastards. The Hateful
Okay,
Eight, you can kind of see where I'm coming from it, just because it's that alternate history angle that Quentin
sure,
has
sure.
embraced a lot here lately, which I really like. I really like when artists do that, whether it's in literature or film. It's just really fun to see that. Of course, with The Hateful Eight, you also do have it's set during, I think it's post Civil War actually. Um, I believe it's the post Civil War, but still that kind of you're still feeling the remnants of the Civil War and just
Sure,
kind of how
sure.
it affected the country that closely after. So I thought that'd be kind of an interesting companion piece, kind of like a film that's like post right after Civil War and just kind of do it with this film. Just like I said, how Tarantino kind of has been on that rewriting history, just kind of like an alternate historical way to kind of go at history from a different angle. It's kind of really interesting. And I also was going to tie that in with Philip K. Dick as well. I don't know if you're familiar with him as a writer. Um, a lot of films are based on his work, kind of very similar
Right,
to Alex
right.
Garland's. Just kind of that where they kind of that rewriting history, that speculative history type thing. I thought that was a really interesting piece to come with, especially the Hateful Eight, just because it is set during the Civil War as well. And also with Inglourious Bastards, I kind of like what Quentin did with that film because I think it's a very smart film in the fact that in Inglourious Bastards, he's kind of presenting to you the Nazis. They're making a propaganda film in within the film, and
Sure.
by the end of Inglourious Bastards, he has you cheering for the bastards. He has you cheering for the Nazis to die. And it's almost like he's kind of flipping it on you, and he's making a propaganda film. You're literally consuming
Yes.
a propaganda film. He's turning it, flipping it on you, and I feel not that Alex Garland is quite doing that, flipping it on his audience, but just the way he, kind of people thought it was going to be one thing and it wasn't. I feel like Quentin does that as well, but he does it a little more like subconsciously. People aren't really picking it up as much because he really does kind of go all out with the genre stuff, where Alex Garland is a little more grounded. He's a genre filmmaker, but he's a little more grounded in reality than Tarantino.
Sure.
So I feel
Yeah.
like with him, it's a little different, but there are the similarities there. They're going into a genre where they're embracing it, but they're ultimately wanting to transcend it and kind of write a new language with it. It's kind of like their genre films become genres unto themselves. So I think
Yeah,
that's really
sure.
interesting to come at it, and especially that they both are kind of using history as a jumping off point.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's a great little trio of pieces in there, and I like all of that, and definitely the alternative history, angle of everything going on with, those really the last few Tarantino movies have all
Hmm.
had it.
Yeah,
So, yeah, no, great one there. I will go with David Fincher's Zodiac.
nice.
As far as like in this movie, there's this civil war obviously happening. In Zodiac, there's the Zodiac killer that is out there, doing these horrible things. But the movie itself being laser focused in on the journalism and the
Hmm.
the work of trying to expose that whole thing and what is actually happening and trying to solve it all. With Civil War, it's like we've been talking about, laser focused on the journalists and photographers who are trying to kind of figure out what's going on and get the message out to everybody and document it all. And so just having this backdrop of violence and just evil, and it really being about the people who are trying to do something about it, it made me think of Zodiac, and it's one of Fincher's best movies, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great piece. I don't know how I didn't think of Zodiac. Wow. Just thinking of it now as you were saying all that, I'm like, wow, that actually does line up perfectly. So, because I was trying to think of a companion piece that kind of involved journalists. I was kind of
Sure.
toying with a few pieces. I kind of wanted to involve that just because I thought that was such an important aspect, and nothing sounded right to me. But man, that's perfect.
I think it works. I think it
Absolutely perfect.
works. So I only have one more piece. Do you have any more pieces?
I do. I have one more big piece, and I have a couple small things I could just like shout out.
Sure.
The one other thing I wanted to mention, and it's not a film, it's a video game, but it's Metal Gear Solid 2. I don't know if you've ever played
Okay.
Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty.
I haven't. I remember when it came out and everybody loved it. But...
Yeah, and it's just solely for the purpose of that game specifically. It kind of really talks about misinformation in a way that is quite eerie. If you go back to when the game came out in 2001, that's kind of what the game is about. It's about that sort of thing, misinformation through technology, how we're going to use, and that's 2001 to now. And just what's interesting about the game too is it's kind of like a lot of people have probably played the game by now, so I'm not really spoiling anything. But the game is ultimately ends up being a simulation. You're ultimately in a simulation, but the game just kind of explores that. It explores kind of technology and where we're going to be at in a world where we can't tell what's real, what's different. AI, we're experiencing that right now with AI and misinformation.
Oh yeah.
It completely amazes me how many people I see share fake movie posters that are obviously AI. Like some of the stuff is pretty convincing. I could believe some stuff at a glance maybe, but some of the stuff I just see, it's like, man, I'm already seeing this. And just that game, people can, if they don't want to play it, I would highly recommend to go look up analysis videos on it and just look at videos of it, because it is quite eerie what Kojima made, kind of brought back then with Metal Gear Solid 2. Just some of the themes of that game are eerily similar to some of the stuff in Civil War. And it's just a great game. I always tell people it's my favorite game of all time, which, what does that mean?
Nice.
It's just a game that had a really big impact on me. And I always thought it was really interesting, too, because Kojima used to sell those games as war games, because they're more about the stealth of the situation rather than the action. And also because he's also doing a Death Stranding film with A24 supposedly, so I look forward to seeing that. So it kind of ties in multiple stances. But yeah, Metal Gear Solid 2, if no one's ever played it, go check it out. Check out the original game. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, I know people love those games, but hearing you talk about, how prescient it was with, everything going on with misinformation right now, feels like a perfect piece to include here. So, I feel like there's got to be some post-apocalyptic zombie movies on here, so why not use 28 Days Later?
Absolutely, that was on mine too.
Yeah, so that's my last one. You could go with Dawn of the Dead, especially once they're at the mall. You can go with a lot of others, but 28 Days Later, I haven't seen it in maybe even since it came out, but I feel like the shot of them driving across, the highway with all the cars stacked up, I think that was in 28 Days Later, possibly.
There were some reference points, I feel like, to 28 Days Later, specifically in Civil War. I feel like he was doing some callbacks to it. Like, I felt that as well when I was watching. So I definitely had it to mention on my list as well, because I felt that as well.
Perfect. So, yeah, that's my last piece. You said you have a couple little things to mention?
One thing I wanted to mention was Sturgill Simpson, because he had a song in the film. I'm a big Sturgill Simpson fan, so when I heard that song, I was like, But I wanted to mention his. There is an animated version of one of his albums called Sound and Fury. It's on Netflix. It's basically just it's an anime kind of it's a telling of the album, so it's basically just the album, but with an animated film attached to it. Really good, really cool, really underseen little project. So that kind of
Hmm.
ties in through Sturgill. And I was trying to think of a road movie. It's kind of hard to think of one that kind of tied well to this one, but I did think of one, and it's Easy Rider. And the reason I
Okay,
picked Easy
sure.
Rider was just kind of the depiction of America, the America it depicted, and just kind of how divided it was even then, and
Sure.
just the judgment. I really feel that a lot in that movie. There's the characters that we're exploring the film with. They go through different parts of the country and just the different people they encounter, and just how big America truly is as a country too. I don't think people really realize that. I
Yeah.
don't think they really realize the vastness of this country and just how truly big it is. And I think that road trip aspect of it, you don't really get that big of a road trip in Civil War, but it's kind of still that road trip kind of feel to it. And Easy Rider has that
Totally.
as well, and it kind of depicts a very specific period in American history, just like Civil War. It doesn't, but it feels like it does to me. You know what I mean? It's like it's something that hasn't happened, but it feels like it has almost. And I feel like Easy Rider, it depicts America that people think existed, but maybe it truly never did.
Yeah.
And just kind of when it's set, kind of around the Vietnam era. The soundtrack to Easy Rider is one of the most well-known soundtracks, and I feel like the
Sure.
soundtrack in this film is kind of really notable. Like mainly just the road trip aspects in that soundtrack, and just the division of the American people and how it was presented back then as well in that film, and just how they were judged in that film. It kind of felt like a cool little piece to include, kind of get a road trip film in there.
Yeah, I'm glad you did because it definitely needs a road trip movie on this list for sure. And back to the Sturgill Simpson one, I haven't seen that animated film. I'm gonna have to watch that. But when the song played, I did think to my. It's funny you brought him up on this
Mhm.
conversation because when that song played, I did think to myself, why isn't Sturgill Simpson in this movie?
Yeah,
Like
he would have been
he's been
perfect in
acting a
it.
lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's been
he's
acting
in
a
the
lot
creator as
lately.
well, which you brought up.
Yep, yep,
Yeah, he would have
absolutely.
been
He's
fantastic
good.
in it. But yeah, I wanted to bring that up. It's really underseen. But yes, it's called Sound and Fury. It's on Netflix. If anyone has Netflix, they should definitely check that out.
Right on. Well, I'm going to read down our list of puzzle pieces and we'll get into some closing thoughts here. We talked about Incendies, No Country for Old Men, Escape from New York, They Live, King Kong, Apocalypse Now, Platoon, The Creator, Full Metal Jacket, Detroit, The Hateful Eight, Inglorious Bastards, Philip K. Dick, Zodiac, Metal Gear Solid 2, 28 Days Later, Sturgill Simpson's animated film Sound and Fury, and Easy Rider. And I think, it's a pretty wide range of things here
Hmm.
because we're dealing with a lot in
Yeah,
this movie. It's such a heavy movie, but there's like a
absolutely.
lot of themes to it here. I don't know. Any closing thoughts? Anything that we didn't quite get to that you want to bring up?
I would kind of like to echo the thoughts I had on Men, the last Alex Garland film we talked about, where I would just tell people to keep an open mind, think for yourselves, support the arts, support films like this, support independent studios, or whatever that means anymore.
Sure.
Just I really want people to support original films and filmmakers and artists who are trying to make challenging work. I know it's a task sometimes to get through some of these films, and because there are a lot of heavy films that are made, but I really do think it's important to give these artists the time and the resources to make these things, because we desperately need artists, especially in times like now. And I just urge people to support artists. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Support artists.
Yeah.
Human
No,
artists.
absolutely.
Support human artists.
Human artists, especially, yes. No, that's actually like what I wanted to bring up is, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but the fact that this is A24's
Yeah.
biggest budget, it's $50 million, but it's doing really well at the
Yeah.
box office, which
Yeah.
is great.
It is
An
great.
adult movie like this
Yeah.
actually doing good at the box office is something to be celebrated, no
Absolutely.
matter what you thought of the movies. So, yeah, that's the only other thing I wanted to bring up. I think that's a good place to wrap up Civil War. Bradley, is there another movie you watched recently you want to recommend to our listeners?
Let's see. I would like to recommend the Kirsten Dunst. I believe it was A24 as well. Woodstock.
I never saw that. I always wanted to.
I just wanted to recommend it for Kirsten. Or you could go with Melancholia, the Lars von Trier film. I just wanted to throw out a Kirsten film because I just thought she was so excellent in this, and I just really wanted to highlight her work in it because she was just truly astounding in this. So I wanted to kind of throw a Kirsten pick out there.
Perfect. Absolutely. She is great, and hopefully we'll see more good stuff from her soon. But yeah, Bradley, tell people where they can find you and everything you're up to.
You can find me on all social media and my name, Bradley Andrew. I have links to all of my social media on there. So if you want to find me on Facebook or Instagram, I'm under my name, and it'll link to all my other social media sites. Just add me on there, and you'll see the link to all that. I share updates on all my work. I mentioned on here last time that Awakening, the film that we made, Awakening of Lilith, it had premiered on Tubi. It's still on there. It also got added to Roku, the Roku channel. So if you have either one of those, you can check out the film on there. And that's pretty much at the moment, pretty much all. So just find me on there under my name, and you can just follow the links and follow me on everything. And I'm always open to talk about film and art, anything. Always happy to talk about film.
Absolutely. Well, Bradley, thank you so much for coming and talking about this one with me, and hopefully we'll get you back again sometime.
Thank you, David.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Civil War. Thanks to Bradley Andrew for joining me on that one, and thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you are subscribed wherever it is that you're listening, and maybe drop us a little 5-star rating and a review. It helps make sure that more people check out the show. Then we can keep doing more fun stuff, covering more movies, doing more of the live shows, which there might be an announcement out right now at the time that this goes up, but if not, it's going up really soon. We got more live shows on the way. Lots of other fun stuff coming too. So make sure you're subscribed. Drop those ratings. You can also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. Join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. And don't forget, we have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, including video versions of some episodes of the podcast. Also, stuff from Awesome Movie Year, stuff from my music career, stuff from the Pups. Harvey's barking at me right now. Let me go get him a snack, and then I'll finish this outro. All right, I'm back. I think Harvey wants me to play a Pup song to close out the episode, but I'm not going to do that. Sorry, Harvey. I've done that enough lately. For a big, heavy movie like Civil War, I should probably close it out with a big, heavy piece of music, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play a track from my current 24 for 2024 series. I don't think this one's out yet at the time of this episode going up. So this is a little preview for you, I believe, unless I'm mistaken. But anyway, it's a song called At the Gates, which is part of this whole 24 for 2024 series that I'm doing, where I release a new single on all the streaming services on the first and third Friday of every month of 2024. 24 brand new songs. This one is called At the Gates. It's a big, heavy, epic piece of music. So I think it's a good one to go out with. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. We will be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.